Good morning and welcome to day 2 of Super Bowl week here in LA. We're on Radio Row covering the great people, athletes, organizations, foundations, and people that matter here on Radio Row. Joining us now, sports lawyer Bobby Hacker, joining Roy Castle and myself. Roy, thanks for bringing Bobby on.
Absolutely, Bobby. Welcome to the show. We're excited to have you with us here on Radio Row. I know you've been around this sports business world for a long time with all your work at Fox Sports, and you've seen a lot of things from what you've gone through, the evolution of the Super Bowl and the growth. And just before we started the show, you were telling us a little bit of your sentiment about being at the game versus being on the couch.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I really appreciate the kind of work you guys are doing in the sports space. So I'm really happy to be here. But yeah, as a fan, which is I'm become again, because when you spend a long time working in sports television, your perspective is a lot less that of a fan than of a business person. And I've always found the best place to watch the Super Bowl is on your couch, your friend's couch, somewhere else. The Super Bowl games, the games itself can be great, but they're very different affairs. It's not like a regular season game where it's fans. And I have nothing against the Super Bowl fans, the big corporate world, but when you start an event that has the low price tickets at $1,200 or $1,500, takes a hardcore fan to throw out the money to attend. But you do have huge swaths of fans, and I know there's a lot of Bengals fans, even more so than my Rams fans, Bengals fans who after a very long drought are very excited to get a ticket and come to this game.
What's interesting to me is that you talked about that evolution, right? The NFL had as an evolution of the game, tickets were fairly reasonably priced for a long time, and then the secondary market gobbled up all of that profit margin, right? And then the NFL probably about 10 or so years ago decided, like, we're taking all the risk, we're spending all the money, we're putting this game on, and we're getting like a third or a quarter of the value, so we're going to bump up these prices, and it really makes it hard for the average fan. I mean, you think about through your role with the Sports Lawyers Association and the work you did at Fox and everywhere else, you dealt with a lot of executives where maybe that wasn't an unreasonable expenditure. It might have been a lot, but they could do it, right? We deal with a lot of people through Sports Philanthropy Network and kids that would give anything to be at the Super Bowl, right? And they've never even been inside the stadium, right? Kayla's pointing at herself over there, right? You look at that, talk a little bit about how you through Fox and through SLA, Sports Lawyers Association, have been involved in kind of giving back to the community, because I know you've done a lot of that work over the years.
Well, I've always felt that it's important for lawyers to give back. Some do it in pro bono, legal related work. Others give to some other sort of charitable organizations. And I think that's just part of it's a good thing to do I don't care if you're in sports or selling insurance or you're a truck driver. I think there's sort of a value added to one's life by saying, I got it okay, let me help somebody else that might not have it so okay. I think that's just sort of a good way to lead one's life. Sports Lawyers Association, of which I'm the immediate past president, roughed my 2 years during COVID, so that was quite an experience. But we've always had a philanthropic gift. And what our goal has always been is that there are giant organizations, nothing against Boys and Girls Clubs and other organizations like that. But what we have done is we look at the communities where we have our annual conference and we say, what organizations are here related primarily to youth sports in underserved communities where it was a $5,000, now it's like a $10,000 or $15,000 gift. How big a difference does that make? Would that really change the face of a national organization? It's a blip. It might help. But if you're a organization that's, let's say just in Baltimore and that deals with kids as we did one year, that's a huge impact for that organization. And it really makes a difference in those kids' lives. So we've always done that. When I was at Fox, we started a program called Fox Sports Supports. And at the time, we would pick 2 or 3 sports for each, organizations in each of the sports. So during football season, it would be this, and college football season, it would be this other organization. And it was just a way of raising up some organizations to the public so that you could contribute to them to enhance people's lives through sports. And I think that on a very general basis, sports is a value-added proposition to a lot of people's lives. And I think there are ways to help improve society in so many ways by addressing needs of certain underserved communities, where you could take what we refer to as an at-risk youth, and you give them an opportunity to have something that distracts them from the draw of something that might not be a positive influence on their lives, and help them, which ultimately helps society, which helps all of us, even if we're not in that community.
So you mentioned Fox Sports Supports and picking out 2 organizations in each of the major sports Fox cover. How did that process work? How did those organizations get identified?
Well, when I was there, it first started, I thought a great idea. And we got an email sent out to all the employees of Fox Sports saying, which of these organizations should be our pick for this year? And it invested everybody with an opportunity to make a decision on what were we going to get behind on our platform. And you'd get a description of the organization, what it did, who was the community being served, et cetera, et cetera. And then by a vote of the employees of the company, we would pick an organization. So I'm very actively involved in the Movember Foundation. And so one year, after years of me trying, that was the organization that we supported. So it helped give a big boost, which I thought was a perfect connection, because the Movember Foundation is based, the motto, when you grow the mustache, is changing the face of men's health. And it started out originally as an organization working with the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and then they expanded into testicular cancer research. And then 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, they did the most important thing to my mind's eye, which is embracing the concept of men's mental health, which is, macho men are not going to want to talk about their mental health, and they embrace that. So I thought it was important that you have all these primarily men that we were showing in the day, because it was before Fox really jumped into college sports. And I thought it was critically important that I was really happy, because now we were all these male viewers and we were highlighting an organization that dealt with men's health.
Yeah, I know Kayla and I talk frequently, and I'll let Kayla jump in here in terms of how you identify those causes, right? You had a list of causes, and Kayla's got some that she's worked with a lot of the athletes that she's interviewed on Legacy After the Locker Room. I'll let her jump in on those.
Yeah, I just think this, Bobby. We live in a society where everybody has had traumatic experiences, right? Like all of us. So I always find this conundrum in the sports space of we want to help everybody. And what's more important, right? Is it mental health? Is it athlete abuse? Yada, yada, yada. But I think at the end of the day, it's whatever you're personally passionate about. I say this to Roy: if it's your vision, it's your mission. You played rugby. Did any of your past experiences sort of push you in a certain direction when it comes to sports philanthropy?
That's an interesting question. No, I think it's just, if you're lucky enough not to have been raised by wolves and had, families that taught you certain values, and you learned the value of charity and good deeds and those kinds of things, I think it helps inform you as you have the opportunity and as you grow up to realize that these are important missions in one's life. and I've just sort of moved on to that. Rugby was the sport I played. It's a sport I love. I coach youth rugby these days. It didn't push me towards being concerned with and supporting, the investigation into CTE. But it does make me question, you know, realistically, let's talk about CTE in all sports. And a friend of mine recently lost her father, who was a former NFL player, and it was clear they knew it was happening, and so they donated his brain, and he had advanced CTE. It's a horrible thing, and here we are in the Super Bowl in this game, and the question is are organizations like the NFL going to embrace no tackle till you're 14, or no tackle till you're a certain age? Are you going to support all those pee-wee kids running around in helmets? Are you going to lose sight of the fact that it's not just helmet-to-helmet concussions, it's the body being abruptly stopped and the head moving back and forth? So education is critically important, obviously. And I think that, if you're an athlete, if you're playing a sport, you take away a lot from it. What I learned in sports about teamwork, about working with others, et cetera, is invaluable. Do I make most of my analogies in life around sports or sports I've played? Absolutely. And I love those sports, but I realize that there's nothing perfect. There's no perfect anything in the world. We aspire to perfection, but, we accept risks in our lives. And if you accept risks, then how do you balance those risks in other ways? And I think you can balance risks by educating people as to what those risks are. Are you really willing to take them? And in youth sports, it's about, which I've been very actively involved in for a very long time, it's about making sure that parents are educated. Kids want to play, but you got to get a parent to say, look, I know that you did this, and I know that you want your kids to do this, but now we know a lot more than when you played. So how are we going to inform your decision on whether you want your kid to participate? Is your kid less tough because you're not going to have him play? No, that's irrelevant. So I think, philanthropy is a concept that exists sort of on a higher plane in many respects. But the reality is you have to educate people to understand why there's a value in supporting organizations and people that help other people in your community.
Yeah, I think you raised some interesting points on concussions and CTE, right? I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding that it's only from concussions as opposed to a lot of those subconcussive impacts that cause us long-term damage. We've seen enormous strides in the last 10 years in terms of awareness and some of the baseline concussion testing implementation. We're going to have Lee Steinberg on tomorrow, who's going to talk about his Brain Health Summit that's coming up on Saturday, and then Chris Nowinski, founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, will join us on Thursday. And concussions continue to be a big issue. And what's interesting, Kayla and I were just out at the Pro Bowl in Las Vegas, and you saw, if you had an opportunity to watch it, a very different sport than what has been going on. And Las Vegas was also hosting the youth flag football champions, and they had over 200 teams competing from across the country all the way up through 18, right? And it was flag. And I think we're going to continue to see that evolution of flag much more than tackle, right? And you're only going to really start tackling in high school and college, and so it's going to reduce huge numbers of hits on enormous numbers of kids. And I know that's an area that ties in very closely with rugby, and a lot of concerns in the rugby space because of those types of hits. I want to jump back for a minute to, I'm fascinated by the way Fox did that. And you said they sent out an email with a list of organizations that the employees could vote for or support. And the inquisitive side of me says, who picked those organizations to put on the list in the first place?
Well, the people involved. First, let me say hello to Lee for me tomorrow. I've only known him this fall, will be 50 years since we met. when I was a college freshman and he was a law student, and we were involved in a political organization together. And I worked for Lee for a couple of years after law school. And what he's done in that space is really important and good. And, you know, he's a guy who grew up with a father who very much taught that about philanthropy and giving back and what he did and equal rights for people and stuff. So again, another man not raised by wolves who's continued it, not just in his lives, but what he's done with all his athletes over the years. You asked about, you know, before I go back to how they picked and what they said, it is important, even in looking at rugby, and you found that maybe 5 years ago, Pete Carroll invited Wesley Serevi, the greatest rugby sevens player in the world who runs an academy in Seattle, to come to the Seahawks and teach them how to tackle. Because the worst invention, in my opinion, in the history of sports is the solid football helmet, because it became used as a weapon. It doesn't protect you. It's not a weapon. Rugby tackling, you know, it's about the percussive impact is a whole other story. But if you know how to tackle without your helmet, you're spearing, and how to wrap and position your head properly, cheek to cheek, as we say, and make that tackle, you're going to save a lot of injuries. But going back to your question about how Fox Sports Supports operated, there was a group of people led by Bill Wanger, who's the head of research and programming, and looked at some organizations that seemed fairly good, and then made sure that they were organizations that weren't supporting executive salaries, lobbying, et cetera, but they were actually going to research, going to the community, going someplace so that, you know, the higher percentage of your dollars were going to what the mission statement of the organization was, which is the mistake a lot of people make. They say, oh, that sounds really great. And then 15% of the dollars actually goes to causes, and the other 85% goes to some crazy mishigas, I don't know what it is, that ends up going to who knows what. Executive salaries, meet and greets, whatever. But in that space, if somebody's saying, I want you to contribute, for me, I want to make sure that the majority of my dollars, I understand it's running an enterprise, you've got overhead, but I want a majority of my dollars going to the mission. And that's what they did at Fox, which is why, you know, you looked at them and there was reports and, you know, where the money went, how it went, and then you decided, what did I really want to support? And it was great because everybody was part of the process. It wasn't no one was told, this year we're doing this. You have decided that we're doing this for this sport. So I thought it was a great program.
Bobby, I have a question for you. I work with a lot of kids, and they all love sports, right? And you tell these kids, especially women and girls, sports is a big, big industry. You don't have to just be an athlete or only be an athlete. And, you know, you talk about being a sports lawyer, could be a sports agent, could be a sports public relations person, a media handler, 100 different things. Would you take just a second and tell our audience a little bit about the career of being a sports lawyer, what that entails, and sort of the highs and lows of your job?
Well, first of all, you mentioned what is a critically important note in 2022. On June 23rd, we'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of the passage of Title IX. So the engagement of girls and women in sports is... I was listening to a program that the SLA put on the other day, and my biggest takeaway from it was, how the hell at 50 years after the passage of this landmark legislation are we still talking about firsts? We should be so far beyond that, and we cannot lose sight of that. And it's a responsibility of not just women beating the drum, but of everybody that's a sports fan. So I had to get that in there because it's a really important topic. But I'll give you an example of it's not just about being a sports lawyer, because a sports lawyer is there a legal discipline of sports? Absolutely not. It's an amalgam of every legal discipline, because I'm going to give you an example. I was consulted about possibly being an expert in a particular case, and I was on a Zoom call with in-house counsels, general counsels of the Power 5 conferences. And of course, after talking about some things, I said, well, and by the way, I only know that 2 of you of these 12 people are members of the Sports Lawyers Association, and you should all join. It's a great organization. And one of the attorneys for a Power 5 conference, she said, I didn't even know I was a sports lawyer. And I said, well, you work in sports, you're a sports lawyer. But it's the same thing. It's not just the law, it's in sports. We had a program that I was able to help pursue when I was at Fox Sports to bring students from a couple of inner city Los Angeles communities to come to Fox Sports to see the operation of Fox Sports. And what happens is you had the older high school kids and even the middle school kids. And I found that it wasn't just them, but the majority of people don't understand that when you're watching sports on television, you'll see 2 or 3 people, or maybe a panel of 5 people. What these kids didn't understand is that there's 200 people on the other side of the camera that work in the sports business. So the opportunities in sports, I have a line and it's the topic of a manuscript of mine that somebody please publish it. It's called No Blinders. And it's simply, the concept simply is focus is good. But if you're so laser focused on what you want to do and you have blinders on, you don't see the opportunities that may be there. And in fact, the perfect job for you, you don't even know if it exists. And you look to your right, you go, that's my perfect job. So I think no blinders is important. So whatever industry, if you want to be in sports, the opportunities in sports are everywhere. As a lawyer, you could be a mergers and acquisition lawyer and be a sports lawyer. You can be an intellectual property lawyer and be a sports lawyer. You can work for the networks and be a sports lawyer. You can work for the leagues and be a sports lawyer. You can be a labor negotiator and be a sports lawyer. So because a sports lawyer lives in every legal discipline, there's a lot of opportunities for sports lawyers. And by the same token, if you're interested in sports as a business, there's opportunities. I ran into a guy I was playing golf with at my public muni the other day, and we were talking, and he's a cameraman for IATSE Local 600. And he got into that, and he had, was a wide receiver at Auburn University, but didn't have a pro career. And, just wanted to stay around and found himself working in TV.
Yeah, it's interesting because you go through the list of careers, as you said, it's really anything can be applied in a sports context and really look at that. And so the whole ability to identify where you're comfortable and where you want to be. Kayla and I were just out at SoFi Stadium walking around there, and you look at the size of the facility, but people don't think of facility operation or food and beverage or the security management, and you produce an event the scale of a Super Bowl and many others. Just the event operations and logistics elements are things people take for granted and don't think about that being part of a sports career.
Oh, well, look, the logistics around putting on a regular season football game, let alone a Super Bowl. The logistics we have in putting on an annual conference for the Sports Lawyers Association. There's lots of moving parts. It's not just like snap your fingers and it's magic. NBC is doing the Super Bowl this year. They've already announced they have 40 cameras. So that means of those 40 cameras, how many are robotic? Maybe a few, but you still got a tech operating that from someplace. And then all the manned cameras, that's at least a cameraman. Then you've got multiple production trucks with people taking feeds. You've got a director looking at a bunch of feeds, an associate director doing timing, a producer saying, we got to get this announcement in, we got to get this in, talking to the talent, you got to say this. And then having all of the crew that are pulling literally miles and miles and miles and miles of cable. And, the modern stadiums are built differently so that a lot of them are plug and play, basically. But still, the logistics to putting on an event, and then the operations at SoFi. So the NFL runs the event, but you've got ticket takers, you've got contractors, security people, and the local police, and on, and the parking, and the hospitality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In our COVID world now, there's a little less in logistics because because they're not having as much hospitality as they normally had. My luck, an event comes to LA, no hospitality. But just how it goes. And, here, this whole scene here at Radio Row, which is one of my favorite parts of the Super Bowl, because you can see it build, Monday and Tuesday, then Wednesday, and then by Thursday and Friday, it is bat-esque crazy around here. And people are coming in, and, the energy is starting to build for the game. And I had a friend of mine who was in sales for years. He didn't work for Fox, but he worked in sports sales. And he'd show up for the Super Bowl usually on Wednesdays, and it would be a meet and greet and handshake and parties and late nights and everything. And Sunday morning, he would take the first flight out of the city so that he too was on his couch for watching the game, which to me is the perfect Super Bowl experience. Now, having been part of broadcasting the Super Bowl, I would work the Super Bowl, and my job was sitting with the NFL in a room during the game, making sure that all the commercials we said were going to be the commercials were the commercials, and making sure that the timing was right, that we got all our commercials in according to their rules. And if it was a fast running quarter and we didn't get a commercial pod in, how are we going to do it? So for me, the game was a work day.
Yeah, not fun and relaxing.
No. But afterwards, we'd always have a party, our wrap party at the hotel we were staying at. So the last Super Bowl we did was in New York, and we have, escort out of the stadium. So the game's over, in cars, boom, back to the hotel. And, we have the big room there, and the bar is open, and there's great food and stuff. But for me, and this is how lucky I think I am, for me, as I remember getting back after this game, and it was a terrible game that year, if you may recall. And we get back to the hotel, and I got there early, and I'm sitting at a table before most of the people get back, talking about the game with Troy Aikman and Jimmy Johnson. Okay, I'm a sports fan. These are like Hall of Famers. Jimmy wasn't in the Hall of Fame yet. But these are two Hall of Fame people talking. Just such a fun opportunity to just talk football with these guys. I'm a fan, and they're talking. So, a great experience, that took the edge off the work day.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you talk about the way that those elements come together. Your mic. The way the elements come together, and the game and the announcing and everything else, right? That's just a huge part of the excitement, right? And these are guys that are just sports fans and enjoy talking sports all day, right? And it's just fun for us that haven't been able to do that at that level, that they can do that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're a Hall of Famer or you're a fan or you're, working on a game, you know the game. There are parts of it If you're played football in high school and you're watching a game and you recognize the defense and you can see, I played that defense and I was the corner on that setup, that's exciting. If you're just a fan who loves the game, you watch it and that's exciting. And there's lots of different ways. I mean, I finally got out of my habit. For years, I'd watch football games and I'd see the production failures. How did they not pick that up? They should have got this in. Oh, you can't do that. They're going to get a call from the NFL because they made that reference. You can't make that reference in an NFL game. Now that I've
occupational hazard.
Now that I'm recovering, I'm able to become a fan again. But I still see all those little things in the game, and I still reach out to the producers and directors I know and sort of kibitz with them about, how did that happen? And they'll go, oh my God, only you would have seen that. But that's just, any discipline with which you're involved, you have a particular expertise. And that expertise informs how you take any action, how you view things. And so I learned to see football differently in my years at Fox Sports than when I was just a good old-fashioned sports fan.
I love it, Bobby. I want to say thank you so much for joining us here at Sports Philanthropy Network to talk about the great work you're doing, for sharing a little bit about what a career in sports looks like. My name is Kayla Bradham. I'm here with Roy Kessel, joining you live in LA on Radio Row for Super Bowl week. Roy, take us out.
Bobby, thank you so much. This is Roy Kessel signing off for Caleb Radham for Sports Philanthropy Network. Thank you, Bobby Hacker, for joining us. And for all our viewers and listeners, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us here live from Radio Row. Please remember to live generously.
Thank you both. Thank you.